Hello Year 6, my name is Miss Aldous and I'm a history teacher at Oakwood Park. We cannot meet you at the moment, but obviously we will do in September. So what we've put together for you today is a presentation to take you through what I think is a really important aspect of history, which is thinking about what should we remember, which sources of history should we protect and should we use when we're trying to understand the past. So it's not a topic, you don't need any prior knowledge of a particular period of time because all the different primary schools will have studied slightly different things. But it is going to hopefully be interesting to you in a historical detective way and also going to help you with some key skills that we'll come back to in the new year. So let's make a start. The first thing I'd like you to think about is which of these do you think is the most important historical item? So on the left we have the Magna Carta, made in 1215, made by the barons to tell King John how to rule the country better. In the middle you might recognise the crown jewels worn by the monarch at important occasions. And down here, quite a sad document, it's a telegram, which was a combination of a kind of letter and a text message, sent during the war to tell a family that someone that they know or love, a member of their family, has been killed in action. So if you pause this clip now and think, which one do you think is the most important historical item? Right, boys, there is not really a right and wrong answer. Feels like a bit of a trick. They're all important, they're all different, they all have different information they can tell us. But hopefully you were thinking along the lines of this one is very old and very precious in terms of there aren't many copies of it. It's also the basis of our laws, so it affects everyone in the country. The crown jewels, very important because it's to do with the Queen. It has a financial value and it's part of our national heritage as a country. And this one again tells our story in the war, but also is very personal to that family. I mean, that to them would be one of their most precious documents, and because of all the symbolism involved. Okay, next. You've worked with sources already in Year 6, but can you think of 5 items, let's say, which historians can use if they want to research the past? So I've given you examples of diaries, it can be from any period of history. Can you make a quick list of 5 while you pause this presentation? Right, here are my examples, but there are many more. You might have talked about books, furniture, buildings, statues, scrolls, coins, jewellery, clothing, pottery. If you wanted to know about wars, you might have said weapons and armour. If you're thinking about how people respond to what's happening to them, you might think of things like paintings and drawings, photographs. You might think also about when people make songs about events. Maybe they make a song about unity, or they make a song about people being against a war or something like that. You might think about the news. We've watched a lot of news, I'm sure, lately. You have as well, so you might think about news recordings, and there are many more. What they all have in common is they are what we call primary sources. So the definition of a primary source, or a definition, is that it's made at the time and it can tell us something about the time that it was made. So I'm going to get you to start thinking, and hopefully if you've got a piece of paper next to you during this session, you can maybe note down a few as you go along. If you could pick 5 sources, primary sources, to tell people in the future about life this year, what would you pick and why? I'll come back to that towards the end of the session. Okay, a little challenge now, a little match up. Can you figure out how we actually managed to get these items? Because many historical items are lost, but hopefully we have enough left to use and we try to look after them. So you've got a chart here and I'd like you to think about the different pictures that you can see. A letter will go into one of these, this column here, and then I want you to think about what sort of protection do you think that particular item would need. Okay, to make sure that people can use it in the future. And if you just make your notes, pause the session, make your notes, and then we'll come back together. Okay, local councils. Hopefully you had in your chart, local councils are usually responsible for things like D. So this is a statue or statue, memorial, I suppose, to the Short brothers. It's quite near to me now. It's on the Isle of Sheppey, where I live. It does look a bit like it's in the middle of nowhere, but there's a reason for that. The Short brothers were aviation experts, so they were involved with early flight, so humans going into the sky and aeroplanes, and that's why their arms are raised. And this is where their tests happened. So today it's kind of like a nature reserve, but it's very flat. That's the main thing. Anyway, so they were working there because their aircraft could take off easily and they could have their runways. Councils, the protection it needs, obviously against the elements, against any damage, but also making sure that people can access it. Okay, so it's important people know where it is, so that might be signs and maps. Next one, charities. Hopefully you had the answer B. They are usually responsible, they need a lot of money, and they are usually responsible for these big historical items. So castles, palaces, country houses, and they offer all sorts of protection, making sure that they are restored properly, that they're safe from fire and flood and that kind of thing, and that visitors can access them and learn all about them. Next one, the Commonwealth War Graves. You may have seen these vans around in Kent. They're often going over to the continent. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission are responsible for, and they maintain and preserve all of the memorials to British soldiers who have been killed in war. And that often, usually in fact, means outside of the UK. So this is in Belgium, this particular photograph, and they make sure they're clean and tidy. They make sure that research is done to figure out who the people are if we don't know. They do planting and things like that, so really important historical job. And they also raise awareness. They've got an excellent website that you can use to research. The last source goes in here. So the National Archives is like a big combination of a vault and a museum in London, in Kew, which I've been to, which you may go to in the future, and it has all of our national documents. So government records, letters. This is a letter from Margaret Thatcher, who was British Prime Minister in the past, and it makes sure that they can be accessed and used by historians, and that they are protected. They're not like going mouldy or being damaged by vandalism and that kind of thing. It's really high security, but you're allowed to access them, and you're allowed to look at them for your own research. Okay, and there are lots of other organisations as well that help protect our history, but it is important just to think, how do we get these sources? Like, how do they survive 2020 so that we can use them, especially when some of them have been there since the 1300s. Okay, let's get you thinking. Here is a selection of items. I want you to pause this clip and note down what they have in common. Right, statues. In the news, very topical, on the news this morning, in fact. Statues, they are deliberately built. So you might say they're made of stone. They're large, big scale. You can see them from all around. They're in public places. They're about famous people or famous events. Some of them you might know what they are already. So Winston Churchill, this one's from London, from Westminster. He was Prime Minister during World War II. That is the reason why his statue is there. He's shown here in World War II time clothes. Okay, so that's the period of time they want you to remember. The next one here, this is a memorial to Queen Victoria. This is in Maidstone. The Chatham Naval Memorial, deliberately up on the hill so that you can see it from all around, and you can also see it from the River Medway. Okay, that's the Pentagon there if you know the Medway towns. You can see it from the River Medway, so that's important. And Chatham Dockyard, which was a royal dockyard and was used for the Navy, that's there, and there's plaques all the way around the edge, and there's this large memorial in the centre. Let's keep going round. Statue of Liberty on Ellis Island in the United States of America. Near Manhattan, in Manhattan. This is famous, probably one of the most famous statues in the world. Huge. You'll know if you've ever visited it or seen it in a film, you can walk around the base, so very, very large, and has a lot of symbolism to it about emigration and about what it means to arrive in the United States and to see this as you arrived by boat. Millicent Fawcett and the right of women to vote and all of her campaigning. Here she is. She is also in London. And Cecil Rhodes. This was on the news this morning. This is in Oxford, on the wall of an Oxford college. I've seen this statue myself when I was living in Oxford. It might not be there by the time that you do this session. The college has voted this morning they would like his statue removed. He was what we call a statesman, so he worked on behalf of the British government in the British Empire in Africa. He was also a businessman, and he has a very controversial past. His actions are very upsetting to a lot of people, and they don't think that he should be therefore on display like this. Interesting. Okay, so a real mixture: military, political, royal, campaigning, sort of international, what it means to be a country, and finally when a statue can be questioned, should it be there? Right, next. Let's think about statues and other types of sources, because statues are a primary source. They're made at the time. They tell us something about the society that makes them. Okay, so if you wanted to know about this woman, Millicent Fawcett, she's a famous campaigner to get women the right to vote in the late 1800s and early 1900s when women could not vote. Which of these two sources would you want to find out more about? Okay, if you were researching her, if you pause this now and have a think about that. Okay, I'll tell you which one I would want. I would want this source here. Okay, because as a historian, I can start to look into this and I can say, why was this made? What was its purpose? Was it to raise publicity at the time? Okay, what were the origins of it? Why does it say that she is law abiding? Why is that a question? Was she a criminal? Did some people say women like her were criminals? Who were the suffragists? I want some more context for this. Who were these people supporting her? What is the nature of this protest that's happening here, this speech that's happening? If you have a look at this one, this might surprise you. When do you think this was made? Right, 2018. So 100 years on from when women officially, or some women, were given the right to vote in this country, they realised that we probably should have a statue for that. So this statue is actually very recent. Which is not to criticise it, but it might tell us more about us than it does about her. Here's another example for you to think about. Two primary sources here. One, on the left, a painting made by a man, an artist, who visited a plantation. Now, a plantation is a huge farm that grows one item, what we might think of as like a cash crop. So cotton, sugar, tobacco. And slaves men and women were taken from the west coast of Africa across the sea, across the Atlantic, what's called the transatlantic, the across Atlantic slave trade, and they were brought to places like this to live, to farm, but they were not farmers like you would see today in this country. They didn't own their own land, they didn't get paid, they couldn't leave, they worked very long hours, they were slaves. Okay, they did not have their freedom. This painting, well, you can think yourself about it, but maybe you'll agree with me. It makes it look difficult, but also acceptable. You know, it's hard physical work. Lots of people had hard physical work in the 1800s, early 1800s. You can see here, this man is probably the overseer. He might be the owner of the plantation, this white man here. And he probably has an estate somewhere in the background. And this would have been made for him to hang. The purpose of this, to hang in his country house to show what his slaves are doing. Okay, growing his crops for him so he can make his money. This one is made by a shipping company to show how they moved the men and women and boys, you can see here, in their ships from the west coast of Africa to the Caribbean and the southern states of America and South America. And you can see here they've done like a plan, basically, of how they fit everyone in, and it is shocking. It's very compact, there's no personal space, and these are all people squished in together and squashed in together with no dignity and certainly no kind of personal freedom and no comfort. Okay, so if you had to pick one, which one do you think would be the most useful? Now again, there isn't really right and wrong answer. If I wanted to know about the experience of slaves, I would say this one possibly tells me more because I can figure out a lot from this about what it was like to be a slave on a boat. But this one can also tell me, if I get past the slightly positive image, I can see this is really hard physical work. Huge field, tall crops, sharp knives to do this work, no machinery. So I can also figure out quite a lot about the slave experience from this one, but I would have to remember when using it that its purpose is not to show the slave experience, it's to show the land and the farming of the plantation owner, okay, of the slave owner. So it's more giving his perspective. He's watching them do the work. The thing about the slave trade, which you'll learn about in year 7 and year 8, is there are not many sources left behind by people like this woman and this child because they didn't have access to written, paper, to pens. They couldn't write down what was happening to them. So we often get sources about them, which is an issue as well. Okay, let's think about you. Which sources do you think you would like if you were going to tell future historians about your life this year? So, you need to think, are these sources going to be really specific to 2020? Are they, for example, a good test of that is, are they different to last year? Does it have to be 2020 when you look at your sources you're going to pick? Are they true of everyone or a group? Both are completely fine, but you might like to think about having a range. Okay, is it really specific to what an 11-year-old is experiencing in the southeast of England? Because that's fine. Okay, that's good. But you might like to think about having a range as well, maybe older people, maybe people in different parts of Britain. Okay, and also, what knowledge would historians need to understand them better? So what would historians need to know about the Black Lives Matter movement to see why people in Kent, why a policeman is kneeling in a field with protesters? Okay, I think this one's Gravesend. So think last weekend, what would you need to know about this to understand this more? Okay, okay, so you are going to think about what sources could be useful, and eventually, here's your task for today. When we pause, you're going to take a sheet of paper and you are going to pick one, okay, or at least one. You can do another one if you want to, if you're really stuck. But in the middle, I would like you to draw a box like this yellow box here. And you're going to put your source in there. Remember to write down what it is as well in case we can't tell. So you might like to write a little title of what it is. So I would want a photograph showing this. I would want a packet of face coverings. Okay, I would want a receipt from my online shopping, which we never did before lockdown. I would want the letter from my primary school telling us that school was shut. Whatever you've chosen, if you can, and it doesn't need to be really complicated and difficult for you and your family, you could perhaps draw it out if it's a letter, maybe write down a key quote. You might like to put a photo in here or a map, but it can be a reproduction, okay, boys? So you don't need to scan it in and that kind of thing unless you want to, unless that's easy for you. It can be a copy, okay? It's going to go in this box here. Obviously, if it's a face mask or an item, like we've talked about at the beginning, some of your primary sources might be physical things, perhaps a picture of it, but you can be creative. I would love to see what you're going to do with this and to see what represents 2020 for you, okay? Whether it's a piece of artwork that you did at home, really can't wait to see what you're going to do, but you think of a way to get it into this box, okay? And then you've got these 6 questions around the outside. So I'd like you to write down, what are the origins of it? So who made it and what date did they make it, if you know? Can be the month, okay? What content does it tell you? Think of the contents page of a book. So what can it tell you about life in 2020? If you've got a face covering, which you're probably not going to do now because I've said this, but if you've got a face covering or a hand sanitizer, tell me about this item. Okay, what does it tell us? Does it tell us that at one point this was really expensive, really in demand, whereas last year nobody had them? What does it tell us? Okay, why was it made? Like, why was it made at the time? Is it made to keep people safe? Is it made to raise awareness? Is it a warning? Is it trying to convince you to do something? Is it to keep people's spirits up? Next one, why is it reliable? Why can we trust it about life in 2020? So you need to think about, is it accurate about or typical about life for people in your group or in society? This one is more scientific, goes back to our list at the beginning. Perhaps you can skip the clip back to there. What is the nature of it? Okay, so is it a diary, an item? And the last one, why is it useful? What will people learn from this about life for you in 2020 so far? Okay, what will it tell them that's unique? So that, boys, will hopefully take you a little while, and Miss Beanie is going to have a way that you can send them to us. So I know she's going to send some instructions on that, and then we can have a look, and we can see what you've come up with. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what you come up with. This format, just change it to suit you. You might want to do it as a big poster. It's entirely up to you, but as long as you've got your 6 questions, your title and your source and your name, don't forget your name, that will be perfect. Last one, something to think about before you start that, is at the beginning our title was what should we remember? And I also think we've now started to think about how should we remember? What items should survive from 2020 so that people can research in the future? What things should we make sure that we don't forget? So you might like to write your answers to those on the back of your picture, or that just might be something that you want to think about and perhaps discuss at home at the end of this session. Okay, thank you very much for taking part today, and I'm really looking forward to meeting you in September, and studying lots more history with you then. Bye bye.